Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into something that really affects all of us. It's these surprising ways we're not always as rational as we think we are. We're going to explore Dan Ariely's book, The Upside to Irrationality, and just kind of unpack some of these fascinating insights into human behavior.
Yeah. We like to think we make logical choices,
Mm.
but really often there are these hidden forces at play that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this whole secret world of, influences kind of shaping our decisions from why like huge bonuses can sometimes backfire to like the hidden cost of free stuff. We're even going to uncover why building that IKEA bookshelf might have made you happier than it should have.
The IKEA effect.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. We tend to just overvalue things that we create, even if they're not objectively that great. The
Mm.
effort that we put into making something just creates this emotional connection. There was this study, and people were actually willing to pay more for their own origami creations, even when they were objectively worse than ones made by experts.
Wow. I can definitely relate to that. Remember that DIY lamp I made? I thought it was like a masterpiece. But everyone else, not so much.
Yeah, and this tendency is really fascinating. It connects to a broader bias called the not invented here bias. This is where we favor our own ideas over those from outside sources, even if those external ideas are objectively better. You can see this in companies, research labs, even in our everyday decision-making.
So even in areas where logic should prevail, our emotions can sneak in and color our judgment.
Absolutely. A great illustration of this is the ultimatum game. In this experiment, one person gets to decide how to split a sum of money with another person. Now, if the second person rejects the offer, nobody gets anything. So what's interesting is that when researchers manipulated the second person's emotions beforehand, by showing them a sad movie clip, for example, it actually impacted their willingness to accept or reject the offers, even after the emotion had faded.
That's pretty wild. So even if you think you've calmed down after a frustrating experience, those like lingering emotions can still be pulling the strings in the background.
Exactly. It highlights how important it is to be aware of our emotional state, especially when making important decisions.
Mm.
We might not even realize how much our feelings are influencing our choices.
This reminds me of the other day, I kind of blew up at a colleague over a minor scheduling conflict. And afterward, I realized it wasn't really about the schedule at all. I was just carrying a lot of stress from another project, and it all kind of spilled over.
Yeah, that's a classic example of how our emotions can kind of create this cascade effect. Even fleeting feelings can trigger a chain reaction that influences future choices long after the original feeling has subsided.
Mm.
It's as though we create a pattern of behavior based on a temporary emotional state.
This makes me think about something I think we've all felt at some point, the urge for revenge. Is it ever truly satisfying? I mean, we've all felt that desire to get through, even when someone wrongs us, right?
Yeah, the desire for revenge is definitely a deep-seated instinct. Even small acts of unfairness can trigger a powerful urge to retaliate. There's this one study where researchers deliberately interrupted people during a phone call, and guess what? Those who were interrupted were statistically more likely to seek revenge in a later unrelated game.
That's kind of unsettling. It seems that feeling wronged can really stick with us.
Yeah, it can. But here's something interesting. Sincere apologies have been shown to actually reduce the desire for revenge. This underscores the power of acknowledging wrongdoing and making amends.
So maybe letting go of that anger and finding a way to forgive is actually the more satisfying path in the long run.
Perhaps. Now, shifting gears a bit, have you ever noticed how we tend to get used to things over time? Both good and bad. That's hedonic adaptation.
Oh, absolutely. It's like that new car smell that fades so quickly, or how you get used to a new house after a while.
Exactly. Another example is how lottery winners often return to their baseline level of happiness after the initial euphoria wears off. And even in challenging situations, we find wills to adapt.
I guess that begs the question. If we adapt to both positive and negative experiences, what should we be aiming for in life? What truly brings lasting satisfaction?
That's a profound question, and one we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the upside of irrationality.
So it's fascinating to think that even something like winning the lottery wouldn't necessarily like guarantee happiness. It really makes you wonder what actually contributes to long-term, fulfillment.
That's a really great point. And Ari digs into this question of lasting satisfaction by examining this other really interesting aspect of human behavior. It's called the identifiable victim effect. So have you ever noticed how we're often more moved by the plight of a single identifiable person than by a massive tragedy affecting tons of people?
Yeah, that's so true. It's like our empathy almost has like limits.
In a way, it does.
Mhm.
Take, for example, the story of baby Jessica falling down that well back in the 80s. It captivated the whole nation. People were just glued to their TVs, hoping and praying for her rescue.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It felt like everyone was holding their breath just waiting for news.
Exactly. Yet tragedies like the Rwandan genocide, despite, their horrific scale, didn't receive nearly the same level of attention or aid. It's just easier to connect emotionally with a single identifiable victim. Someone we can actually picture and relate to than with a vast, faceless group of people suffering.
Yeah, it's sobering thought. Is there anything we can do to kind of combat this tendency?
Well, Ariely suggests that when we encounter news of a tragedy, we should try to personalize it. Imagine, the individuals who are actually affected. Think about their hopes, their dreams, their families. Connecting with their stories, even in a small way, can really help us tap into that empathy and motivate us to act.
I like that. It's about finding those points of human connection, even in the face of like overwhelming suffering. This kind of makes me think about how we can use these insights from behavioral economics to make better choices in our own lives. Like, where do we even begin?
Well, Ariely argues that one of the most important steps is simply to be aware of our irrational tendencies. It's not about, beating ourselves up for being human. It's about recognizing our biases and then using that knowledge to make more informed choices.
So it's like shining a light on those inner forces that are shaping our decisions, just bringing them into like our conscious awareness.
Precisely. And he also emphasizes the importance of testing our assumptions. We often just operate on autopilot, making decisions based on gut feelings or what's always been done in the past. But what if those assumptions are flawed?
That's a good point. So how can we become more critical of our own assumptions?
Well, Ariely suggests adopting a more experimental approach to decision making. And we can apply this not just to our personal lives, but to our work, our businesses, even how we approach, societal challenges.
So instead of just assuming we know the answer, we should be more willing to test things out, gather evidence, and see what actually works.
Exactly. It's about embracing, a spirit of curiosity and open-mindedness, being willing to challenge our beliefs and let the evidence guide us.
This makes me think about all that like conventional wisdom we hear all the time. Things we often accept as true without really questioning them.
Right. For example, the old saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. We now know that corporal punishment is actually harmful and ineffective. But it took years of research and challenging, deeply ingrained beliefs to reach that understanding.
It's a reminder that we need to be willing to question the status quo even when it feels uncomfortable. It also makes me think about how we approach problems on like a societal level. We often implement policies without truly knowing if they'll actually work.
And Ariely is a strong advocate for using experimentation in policymaking. Instead of launching these massive programs based on untested assumptions, he suggests running smaller pilot programs to gather data and see what truly makes a difference.
So it's like A/B testing for public policy, trying out different approaches, measuring the results, and then scaling up the most effective solutions.
Exactly. It's about being data-driven, not ideology-driven. Letting the evidence guide us, even if it means challenging, our preconceived notions.
All of this is giving me a lot to think about. It feels like a call to be more mindful, more intentional in the way we approach not only our own decisions, but also how we contribute to shaping the world around us.
Absolutely. And speaking of mindful decision-making, Ariely shares a very personal story in the book. It's about this life-altering decision he had to make that speaks to this point.
Oh, wow. I'd love to hear about that.
As you know, Ariely was severely burned when he was younger.
Yes, and his personal experience with pain and recovery often comes up in his work.
Well after his accident, doctors recommended amputating his right arm below the elbow. They argued that a prosthetic hook would, reduce his pain, lessen the number of surgeries needed, and just be more functional in the long run than his injured hand.
That must have been an incredibly difficult decision to grapple with.
It was. And ultimately, Ariely chose to keep his arm. He reflects on how a whole range of irrational biases likely played a role in his decision.
I'm curious to know what those biases were.
Well, there's the endowment effect. We tend to overvalue things simply because they're ours. Then there's loss aversion. The pain of giving something up is often greater than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
So even if amputating his arm could have improved his quality of life in some ways, the thought of losing a part of himself was just too overwhelming.
Yes. He also mentions the status quo bias. That tendency to prefer things to stay the same even when change might be beneficial. Plus, any decision involving such a permanent, irreversible change would amplify these biases.
Yeah, I can see how all those factors combined could make it almost impossible to think about that situation purely rationally.
Yeah, it's a really powerful example of how even when facing these huge life-altering choices, our emotions and those deeply ingrained biases can really cloud our judgment.
So, knowing what he knows now about behavioral economics, does Ariely regret his decision?
Well, he does reflect on the fact that his arm has limited functionality and causes him chronic pain. He acknowledges that from a purely rational standpoint, amputation might have been the better choice.
It's amazing how open and honest he is about his own experiences with irrationality.
It's what makes his work so compelling. He doesn't shy away from vulnerability. And by sharing his own struggles with decision-making, his insights become that much more relatable.
It's reassuring to know that even the leading experts in this field are still figuring things out, still grappling with their own biases. It makes those of us who are just starting to learn about behavioral economics feel less alone.
Absolutely. It underscores the importance of self-awareness and self-compassion. We all make mistakes, but understanding our biases is the first step toward learning to make better choices, in the future.
So, what concrete steps can we take to become better decision makers? What does Ariely actually recommend?
Well, he suggests a few key strategies. First, we need to pay attention to our emotions and how they might be influencing our choices. Second, we should test our assumptions, gather evidence, and challenge our beliefs. And finally, we need to be patient and give ourselves time to cool off before making any major decisions.
So, it sounds like a path towards a more thoughtful, more intentional life overall.
Precisely. It's about taking the time to pause and reflect, and aligning our choices with our deepest values and goals.
All this makes me wonder if there are ways we can design our world, our workplaces, our communities, even our institutions, to better account for these irrational tendencies that we all share.
That's a fantastic question, and one that Ariely explores in depth in The Upside of Irrationality.
I'm definitely adding it to my reading list. This deep dive has given me so much to think about.
It's been a pleasure discussing these ideas with you. And remember, embracing our irrationality doesn't mean surrendering to our worst impulses. It's about understanding ourselves better so we can make choices that contribute to a richer, more fulfilling life.
Yeah, it's really empowering to think that we can use this knowledge about our own irrationality to actually design a better world around us. It's not about trying to, change human nature. It's more like working with it.
Exactly, and that's where this concept of choice architecture comes in. By subtly changing how choices are presented, we can actually nudge people in a positive direction without limiting their freedom.
I love that phrase, choice architecture. It's like we're becoming architects of good decision making. Can you give me an example of how this actually works in the real world?
Sure. Think about retirement savings plans.
Yeah.
Traditional economics assumes people will logically plan for their future and save accordingly. But we know from behavioral economics that people often really struggle with delaying gratification. We tend to prioritize those immediate needs over long-term goals.
Yeah, it's so easy to just get caught up in the here and now, right?
Exactly. So how can we use choice architecture to encourage better saving habits? Well, one really effective approach is to automatically enroll people in retirement plans and give them the option to opt out if they choose to.
Oh, so it's like flipping the default setting. That's brilliant.
It is, and studies have shown that this simple change can significantly increase retirement savings rates. People are still free to choose, but the way the choice is presented makes it easier to do what's best for them in the long run.
It's amazing how such a subtle shift can have such a big impact. This makes me think about all the other areas where we could apply this concept, like healthcare education, even tackling environmental challenges.
Absolutely. There are so many opportunities to use our understanding of human psychology to design these systems that promote positive behaviors and just lead to better outcomes for everyone.
It's like we can harness the power of our irrationality for good.
Precisely. And that brings us to one final thought-provoking question to consider. We've been talking about how emotions, biases, past experiences can influence our choices. But what role is technology playing in all this?
That's a really interesting question. How is technology shaping the way we make decisions?
Well, it's a complex issue, but one thing to consider is how technology is often designed to actually exploit our irrational tendencies. Think about those social media algorithms that just keep us glued to our screens, or, online shopping sites that use all these persuasive tactics to encourage Those impulse buys.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being bombarded with all these temptations. They're designed to trigger those dopamine hits in our brains.
Exactly. So the challenge becomes, how can we use technology in a way that empowers us rather than manipulates us?
That's a great question for our listeners to think about. How can we become more aware of the ways technology might be influencing our choices? And how can we reclaim our agency in a world that's increasingly designed to capitalize on our irrationality?
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation we all need to be having, because as technology continues to evolve, so too will our understanding of its impact on human behavior.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. It's made me realize just how complex and fascinating human decision-making really is.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And remember, the journey of understanding our own irrationality is an ongoing one. The more we learn, the better equipped we'll be to make choices that lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the upside of irrationality. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration into the human mind.